At 6 o'clock on a humid Tuesday morning, I opened my front door wearing an old gray bathrobe, holding a mug of coffee that still smelled burnt from the cheap Walmart machine I never bothered replacing after my wife died. And standing on my porch were two police officers, a patrol SUV with flashing lights, and a blonde woman in white tennis clothes smiling like Christmas came early. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about a neighborhood pool anymore. It was war. Funny thing is, 6 months earlier, I didn't even know her name. By the end of it, I knew her hidden bank accounts, her fake contracts, her kickback scheme, and exactly how much prison time her lawyer was trying to negotiate down from. Her name was no longer Victoria Langston after everything that happened, but back then, that was the name everybody in Ashwood Grove whispered like she owned the whole zip code. And honestly, for a while she kinda did. My name's Nolan Reyes. I'm 58 years old, retired construction litigation attorney, widower, bad sleeper, decent cook when I feel like trying, and the kind of man who thought moving into a gated suburban HOA community might finally give him some peace after 27 months of watching cancer slowly erase the love of his life one hospital bill at a time. My wife Elena passed away the previous October. 24 years together. And suddenly I was eating dinner alone in silence, so loud it physically hurt. Every room in that old house carried her voice. The hallway still smelled faintly like her lavender lotion. Her coffee mug stayed beside the sink for 3 weeks because I couldn't bring myself to move it. Grief does strange things to a man. It makes time slippery. Some mornings I'd wake up thinking she was still asleep beside me. Other mornings I'd sit in my truck outside grocery stores because hearing couples argue over cereal brands felt unbearable. So I sold the house and moved 2 hours north into Ashwood Grove, this polished little HOA neighborhood outside Austin with identical sidewalks, expensive mailboxes, and a giant resort-style community pool sitting right in the center like a blue jewel everybody worshipped. The brochures called it luxury living with elevated community standards. Looking back now, that should have been my warning sign. The first few months were quiet. Too quiet almost. People waved politely without actually wanting conversation. Husbands power walked at 6 in the morning wearing Apple Watches and expensive sneakers. Women drank wine on patios while pretending not to judge each other's landscaping. Everybody smiled, but nobody relaxed. And in the middle of all of it was Victoria Langston. 46 years old, real estate broker, vice president of the HOA, professionally highlighted blonde hair, designer workout clothes every hour of the day, and always carrying this thick leather binder against her chest like she was guarding nuclear launch codes instead of neighborhood bylaws. She had this perfume, too, vanilla mixed with something sharp underneath it, expensive but overwhelming. You could smell her coming before she turned a corner. Her husband sat on city council, which she mentioned so often it almost sounded rehearsed. The first time we spoke, she corrected the angle of my trash bins while introducing herself. I should have laughed then. Maybe I would have saved myself months of hell. Instead, I just nodded politely because I was tired, and tired people tolerate things healthy people never would. Then summer arrived, and my nephew Caleb came to stay with me before leaving for college. 17 years old, smart kid, good heart, obsessed with engineering and old Mustangs. Elena adored him. We never had children of our own, so Caleb became the closest thing we ever got. Having him around made the house feel alive again. We grilled burgers, watched baseball, argued about music, little ordinary things that started making me feel human again. The trouble started on a Saturday afternoon in June. Caleb invited 2 friends from his summer job over to swim at the community pool. Nice kids. Respectful. They even called me sir, which honestly shocked me more than anything these days. They'd been there maybe 40 minutes when Victoria appeared beside the pool, carrying her binder like a sheriff arriving at a crime scene. I still remember the sound of her sandals clicking against the concrete. Everybody got quiet when she walked up. "Excuse me," she said loudly enough for half the pool to hear, smiling that fake pageant smile. I'll need to see guest authorization for these boys. Caleb looked confused. They're with me, he said. Victoria ignored him completely and looked straight at me. Ashwood Grove policy limits non-resident recreational access without prior registration. Ich blinkte her. They're teenagers swimming for an hour, Victoria. Rules exist for a reason, Nolan. Then came the line that changed everything. Communities decline when standards become optional. The way she said it, slow, cold, deliberate, made the hair rise on the back of my neck. Caleb's friends immediately started gathering their towels, embarrassed. Other residents pretended not to watch while very obviously watching. And Victoria stood there smiling like humiliating children somehow counted as civic duty. Then she suspended my pool access on the spot, right there beside the water, in front of everybody. And as Caleb quietly apologized to me walking back home, I realized something that chilled me more than her threats ever could. Victoria Langston didn't care about rules. She cared about control. And unfortunately for her, I'd spent 20 years making a living dismantling people exactly like that. Most people think power looks loud. Some guy screaming in meetings or throwing punches in parking lots. Real power is quieter than that. Real power smiles while humiliating your nephew in public. It makes you feel like somehow you deserved it. That was Victoria Langston's specialty. She didn't yell much in those early days. She preferred paperwork, certified letters, compliance notices, passive-aggressive emails sent at exactly 6:12 in the morning like she'd been awake all night thinking about ways to ruin somebody's peace. 3 days after the pool incident, I opened my mailbox and found an official HOA violation envelope stamped urgent community action required. I remember standing there in my driveway under the Texas heat, reading accusations so ridiculous I actually laughed once before realizing she was serious. Improper lawn maintenance, visible waste containers, disruptive guest behavior, and my personal favorite, failure to preserve community harmony. Community harmony. Like she was the Queen of England protecting the realm from invading barbarians instead of a suburban tyrant with a clipboard and too much free time. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday night, 7 p.m. sharp. Problem was, Thursday would have been Elena's birthday. First birthday since losing her. I'd already planned to drive out to the cemetery with sunflowers because yellow ones were her favorite. Funny what grief attaches itself to flowers, songs, coffee cups, random receipts in drawers. Little landmines everywhere. And somehow Victoria had scheduled her little HOA trial on the exact night I was already trying not to emotionally drown. Maybe coincidence. Maybe not. With people like her, you stop believing in coincidence pretty fast. That night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by HOA documents, legal pads, highlighters, and half-drunk coffee. And for the first time since retirement, I felt that old part of my brain waking back up, the litigation part. Construction law teaches you something important after enough years. Every corrupt system eventually gets lazy. People who abuse authority long enough start assuming nobody will challenge them. And once they start assuming that, they stop hiding their mistakes. By midnight, I'd already found 3 procedural violations in Victoria's notice. Wrong notice period. Invalid hearing format. Policy enforcement that directly contradicted the original community charter filed with the county. Rookie mistakes. Arrogant mistakes. The hearing itself happened inside Victoria's dining room because apparently our HOA believed private residences counted as government buildings now. I walked in carrying a folder thick enough to stop bullets. The room smelled like lavender candles and expensive wine. Victoria sat at the head of the table wearing a cream-colored blazer like she was preparing for a Senate hearing instead of harassing retirees. HOA President Richard Holloway sat beside her looking nervous already. He was one of those exhausted older men who accidentally become HOA presidents because nobody else wants the job. Then there was Denise Walker, the HOA treasurer, quiet woman, accountant type, sharp eyes behind thin glasses. She barely spoke, but I noticed immediately she actually read documents instead of pretending to. Victoria launched into a full presentation. Actual slides, property values, community standards, resident concerns. Every sentence wrapped in fake professionalism while subtly pointing at me like I was some dangerous influence threatening civilization itself. Ashwood Grove has built a reputation on consistency, she said smoothly. Residents expect enforcement without exception. Then she clicked to a slide showing generic pool photos while talking about outside influences disrupting community expectations. Outside influences. Caleb was born in Texas, but I knew exactly what she meant. Everybody in that room knew. I let her finish. Never interrupt somebody digging their own grave. When she finally stopped talking, I opened my folder calmly. Before we continue, I said, I'd like clarification on why this hearing violates Section 4.2 of the HOA Charter. Silence. Richard blinked. Victoria's smile twitched slightly. I kept going. You issued 48 hours notice instead of the required 7 days. The hearing was scheduled in a private residence without community disclosure, and the pool restriction itself directly contradicts the original charter protections regarding family recreational access. Denise looked up immediately, actually looked interested. Victoria crossed her arms. Those bylaws are outdated. Outdated isn't the same thing as legally amended. That landed. You could feel it hit the room. Richard started flipping papers nervously. Denise slowly removed her glasses and reread something in front of her. And that's the moment Victoria should have backed off. A smart person would have regrouped, rescheduled, played nice. But bullies hate embarrassment more than anything on earth. So instead, she got personal. Maybe, she said carefully, Mr. Reyes is struggling emotionally after his recent loss and misinterpreting standard enforcement as targeted harassment. There it was, the widow card. The room went dead quiet. I remember hearing the hum of her refrigerator from across the house. Funny what your brain notices when anger hits that cold. Not hot anger, cold anger. The dangerous kind. I closed my folder slowly. My wife died slowly over 2 years, I said calmly. Trust me, Victoria, I learned the difference between suffering and inconvenience a long time ago. Nobody moved. Denise looked like she wanted to disappear into the walls. Richard stared at the table. Victoria kept smiling, but it looked shakier now. The vote still passed that night. 3-2 upholding the suspension. But something changed in that room. People saw her, really saw her. And once people see what somebody actually is, they can't unsee it. Caleb noticed it too driving home. She hates being challenged, he muttered staring out the passenger window. No, I said quietly. She hates witnesses. That was the night I started digging for real. Public records, contractor filings, Bootget, development permits, vendor contracts. I turned my dining room into a war room exactly like the old days. And the deeper I looked into Ashwood Grove's financial history, the uglier it got. See, the neighborhood had been built only 4 years earlier by a development company called Sterling Horizon Communities. Luxury branding, polished marketing, the usual suburban fantasy package. But certain numbers weren't matching. The community pool supposedly cost nearly $2 million to build. Impossible. I'd litigated resort projects bigger than that for half the price. Landscaping invoices were inflated too. Maintenance contracts, security costs, everything looked padded, and one name kept appearing beside every approval signature. Victoria Langston Realty Group. Then the harassment escalated. Suddenly neighbors got warnings for tiny violations nobody enforced before. Basketball hoops, decorative lights, patio furniture. It was fear management. Victoria wanted the entire community nervous enough to stop asking questions. But she focused on me hardest. Cars slowed outside my house at night. Visitors got photographed. Caleb found printed violation reminders tucked under his windshield wiper twice in 1 week. One afternoon, I caught Victoria herself parked across from my driveway, pretending to check emails while photographing my property through sunglasses. She smiled when I waved at her. That kind of smile people wear right before poison enters a story. The surprising part wasn't the harassment, though. It was who finally approached me because of it. Denise Walker knocked on my door one evening, carrying a cardboard archive box against her chest. No muck-up. Sweat on her forehead. Nervous. "I think something's wrong with the HOA finances," she whispered before I even invited her inside. We sat at my kitchen table while thunder rolled outside and summer rain hit the windows. Denise opened the box slowly, like she was handling explosives. Inside were invoices, vendor agreements, internal emails, payment summaries, years' worth of paperwork. "I tried asking questions," she said quietly. Victoria always shut it down. I started reading. 10 minutes later, I forgot the rain existed. Vendor overbilling. Duplicate maintenance contracts. Landscaping charges 3 times market rate. Then I found the first real crack in the wall. A private consulting payment tied directly to Victoria's brokerage firm during the construction phase of Ashwood Grove. $58,000 labeled Community Enhancement Advisory. Total nonsense. Construction fraud has a smell to it after enough years. You start recognizing patterns the way mechanics recognize engine noise. And sitting there at my kitchen table with Elena's old coffee mug beside me and thunder rattling the windows, I realized Victoria Langston hadn't been protecting the neighborhood. She'd been robbing it. And the second she realized, I knew that things were about to become genuinely dangerous. The strange thing about exposing corruption is that the money part usually isn't what breaks people. It's the panic afterward. The second Victoria realized somebody finally understood what she'd been hiding inside those HOA accounts, she stopped acting like a polished neighborhood queen and started acting like a cornered animal. And cornered people get reckless. Fussed. 2 days after Denise brought me the financial records, somebody smashed the motion lights beside my garage. Not stolen, smashed. Deliberately. The next morning, Caleb found deep scratches running along the side of his Mustang like somebody dragged a key across the paint from front bumper to tail light. I remember him standing there staring at it quietly, jaw tight, trying not to look angry because he knew I already had enough on my plate. That hurt more than the car itself. Victoria still wasn't saying things directly, of course. People like her almost never do. Instead, she started whisper campaigns around the neighborhood. Suddenly, I was unstable. The grieving widower losing his grip. The retired lawyer harassing volunteers. The dangerous man obsessed with conspiracy theories. But the problem with lies is, eventually they need momentum to survive, and momentum creates mistakes. Ours came during Caleb's graduation party. We invited maybe 20 people over, family, a few neighbors, burgers on the grill, music playing low outside. For the first time in months, the house actually felt warm again. Alive. I remember standing by the patio, watching Caleb laugh with his cousins, and thinking Elena would have loved this moment so much it probably would have made her cry. Then the city inspection truck rolled into my driveway. Right behind it, Victoria's white Mercedes. Timing that precise isn't accidental. She called code enforcement, hoping they'd publicly humiliate me in front of my entire family. The inspector stepped out, already looking annoyed before he even reached the porch. Complain about illegal modifications and occupancy violations, he sighed. Caleb looked stunned. My sister muttered, "You've got to be kidding me." Victoria stood near the curb wearing oversized sunglasses, pretending she just happened to be taking an afternoon walk through the neighborhood. That woman loved theater more than oxygen. Problem was, I'd spent 20 years preparing for moments exactly like this. I disappeared into my office and returned carrying a banker's box full of permits, inspection certificates, architectural approvals, contractor licenses, enough documentation to make a city attorney blush. The inspector spent nearly 2 hours checking everything while Victoria hovered nearby, practically vibrating with anticipation. And the whole time, Caleb live-streamed it on social media without her noticing. That turned out to be the biggest mistake she ever made. Because live streams catch things polished narratives can't control. Her facial expressions, her interruptions, her repeatedly pressuring the inspector to look harder. The comments online exploded in real time. This HOA lady is insane. Why is she stalking these people? Bro, this feels racist as hell. Then came the moment that changed everything. The inspector closed his clipboard and looked directly at Victoria in front of half the neighborhood. "Ma'am," he said flatly, "this property is fully compliant. Honestly, one of the cleaner builds I've inspected this year." She snapped. Completely snapped. "That's impossible," she barked. "Check the pool equipment again. Check the garage. There has to be something." And right there on Caleb's live stream, with hundreds of people now watching, Victoria Langston accidentally revealed exactly who she really was. Not a protector of standards. Not a concerned community leader. Just a bitter woman desperate to punish people she couldn't control. That night, Denise came back over with more records, and together we finally uncovered the full picture. Over $800,000 missing through inflated construction contracts, fake maintenance agreements, and vendor kickbacks tied directly to Victoria's brokerage company. The community pool everybody worshipped had been massively overbilled. Landscaping too. Even snow removal contracts in Central Texas. I actually laughed when I saw that one. Corrupt people always get greedy near the end. We brought everything to state investigators the following week. Emails, bank transfers, vendor records, audio recordings. Denise had preserved years of evidence because some part of her always knew this day was coming. Once investigators started issuing subpoenas, the whole neighborhood turned upside down. News vans appeared outside the entrance gates. Homeowners suddenly wanted emergency meetings every night. People who ignored me for months were now knocking on my door, asking questions in whispers. And Victoria, she unraveled publicly. At the final community meeting held inside the local middle school gymnasium, she walked in beside her attorney, wearing this pale blue suit, trying desperately to look calm. But you could see in her eyes already the panic. I presented the financial timeline on a projector screen while nearly 100 residents sat in folding chairs listening so quietly you could hear the air conditioner rattling overhead. Every fraudulent payment, every inflated invoice, every hidden transfer connected directly back to her. Then Denise displayed the email that killed whatever defense Victoria had left. "We can bury the excess costs inside long-term HOA assessments." Her own words, right there on the screen for everybody to see. Victoria stood up so fast her chair tipped backward. "You think you're some hero?" she shouted at me. This community would fall apart without people like me enforcing standards. Nobody answered her. Not one person. Because the spell had finally broken. Richard Holloway looked physically sick. Neighbors stared at her like they were seeing a stranger wearing Victoria's face. And for the first time since all this started, she looked small. 6 months later, she accepted a plea deal involving fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial disclosures. Her real estate license disappeared overnight. Her husband resigned from city council before reporters could drag him into the mess completely. Ashwood Grove rewrote the entire HOA charter afterward. Financial transparency rules, independent audits, resident oversight committees, the works. Caleb left for college that fall with a scholarship fund partially created from recovered HOA money. Elena would have loved that part most. Sometimes I still sit outside early in the morning, drinking terrible coffee beside that same community pool where all this insanity started. Kids swim there now without anybody policing who belongs and who doesn't. Neighbors actually talk to each other again. The place finally feels like a community instead of a country club run by fear. But every now and then somebody online tells me I overreacted, that maybe I should have ignored Victoria from the beginning and just moved on with my life. Maybe they're right. Maybe a smarter man would have stayed quiet. Then again, if somebody humiliated your family, stole from your neighbors, weaponized power against vulnerable people, and hid behind fake community standards while doing it, what exactly would you have done? Let me know in the comments, because honestly, I still think about that question sometimes. And if you've ever dealt with HOA corruption, neighborhood bullies, or people who mistake authority for ownership over other human beings, subscribe and stick around. Because trust me, this story isn't nearly as rare as people think.